Good morning. It's really fantastic to be here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Anna Marie, or Anna, whatever you want to call me. I work with teenagers, so I get called all sorts of things. But Anna and Anna Marie is fine. It's fantastic to be here this morning. For those of you that don't know me, I actually was a part of this church about 4 years ago for a couple of years, but I now go to the community church down in Stapenall. I'm part of the core leadership team there, which is mad and amazing. So it's great to be here with you this morning. It kind of just feels like coming back to family, really. Come to see the family, which is really nice. So as I just said, I work with teenagers. So I work for a local charity called Eagle's Nest, and we work with young people that can't access mainstream education, so kind of normal, everyday school, for a whole host of reasons: mental health, childhood trauma. So we kind of work with the young people that other people have tried and not managed to. It's a really tough job, but I absolutely love it. We're based just down in Branston, and the other thing just to say about me is that I'm a complete music geek. So I will often reference songs in my talks because that's just how God speaks to me, and that's just a little bit of me. And I love a good music quiz as well. So this morning I've been asked to speak to you about singleness. Is this going to... Oh, wrong one. There we go. I didn't realise it was up already. I've been asked to speak to you about singleness. It won't surprise you to know that I am single. So that is why Jill has asked me to come and speak to you this morning. It's something that I am really passionate about, and I'll tell kind of a bit more of my story and my journey with that a little bit later on. So to start with then, I'm just going to start with some definitions of singleness. So I put into Google, as we all do, some definitions of singleness, and they were kind of nothing outstanding, really. The quality or state of being single, or unmarried or not involved in a stable sexual relationship. Pretty standard things that you'd expect to be definitions of singleness. But I've got some of my own. Singleness is an adjective, it's not a noun. So it's a person's relationship status. It doesn't define who they are. Just the same as if you're married or you're in a relationship, you are still your own individual, unique person in your own right. Being in a relationship doesn't define who you are as a person, just as being single doesn't define who you are as a person. There's also kind of different types of singleness. So single can mean being never married, or just currently not in a relationship, widowed, separated, divorced, or attending church on their own. So maybe their partner isn't a Christian or doesn't come to church, so they come on their own. And it still gives them that feeling of that loneliness, that singleness. That was really interesting when I thought about that. I'd not kind of thought about that concept before. So some statistics for you then. 40% of the UK adults are single, and that figure came from research by YouGov in 2014, and that is across all age groups. And the move towards singleness is a large and long-term trend that we are seeing in society. And more people are choosing to remain on their own. Each year, more people are marrying later in life, and more remain single after divorce. And living longer means that more people are widowed as well. So what about singleness and the church then? So regular churchgoers do not include that 40% single people. They are underrepresented. The majority in the church are 60% married, compared to less than 50% in society who are married and living together. So statistically, there are fewer single people in the church, particularly fewer single men than women. But society is changing, but the church is not yet reflecting that shift. We are seeing more people in society, as I said before, waiting longer for relationships, for marriage, but we're not kind of seeing that trend yet. Although the last couple of years there have been a huge increase in more young men coming to church. I know we've certainly seen that at the community church. I've heard lots of stories up and down the country, actually, of young men, particularly under 25s or around 25 years old, just walking into church and just wanting to know more about Jesus. So we are kind of seeing a bit of a shift there. Obviously, we don't know if those men are married, single, or whatever. So because married people are in the majority, understandably, the focus in church tends to be marriage, and that tends to be take a lot of focus and attention. And so as a result, many single people say that they feel excluded and unfortunately choose not to attend church. So the problem is that singleness isn't celebrated or acknowledged as much as marriage. Single people feel that marriage has been put on a pedestal as the ultimate life goal, and therefore they're left feeling lesser, incomplete, not good enough, because they're single. And this can lead to loneliness, isolation, and in some cases, people leaving the church. But what does the Bible say? So in the Old Testament, we see a real focus on marriage, family, and having children. So in the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam a command and a blessing that the Jews came to take very seriously. So in Genesis 1:22, it says, "And God blessed them, saying, 'Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it.'" So to the Jews at the time, childbearing was a sign of God's blessing, whereas barrenness was a sign of a curse. So to remain single was seen to disobey this command to be fruitful and to undermine God's blessing. Singleness was labelled a curse for many in the Old Testament, and it was seen as a dead end. To be single was like blotting out your own name from under heaven because you wouldn't continue the family line through your children because you didn't have any. And that was really important in the Jewish culture. The prophet Jeremiah, one of the few singles mentioned in the Old Testament, there are others, Ruth, but there's not many really. But Jeremiah was actually commanded by God to be single as a sign of impending doom for Israel. So you can find that in Jeremiah 16, 1-4. It's all a bit depressing, isn't it, in the Old Testament? But the good news is it didn't stay that way. Hooray! Thank goodness. So in the New Testament, we see a shift and a change in terms of single people who were previously hidden and seen as cursed, actually now coming to the forefront of the story. Jesus himself was single, and he comes and challenges how God's people then and now think about the single life devoted to his kingdom. When previously single people were excluded from God's kingdom expansion plan, now his cross changes everything. Biblically, singleness is not weird, it's not second class, and it's not an afterthought to God. So how did things change? Jesus redeemed singleness. By his death on the cross, he changes the mission of God's people. So it was no longer about physical multiplication, having lots of children, like it was in the New Testament, and that was something that excluded single people. It was now about spiritual multiplication, disciple making. And in Matthew 28:19, he says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." And he didn't say, that's just for married people. That was for everybody. So this mission was now something that single people could be a part of. In fact, some of the key people in advancing the kingdom of God were single. Paul is probably the most known because he's quite explicit about it. Some of his stuff, a little controversial. But Paul specifically writes about being single in the Bible. I think he's the only person I'm aware of that does. But we are aware that John the Baptist was probably single. He paved the way for Jesus. So all of his time was kind of spent doing what God had called him to do to prepare for Jesus' coming. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. There's nothing explicitly saying that they were single. There's no record of them being married either. And because they were brothers and sisters that lived together, it's kind of assumed that they were single. And we know they were a huge part of following Jesus. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. We read about Mary and Martha a fair bit in the New Testament. And so they were single people that were a massive part of advancing the kingdom of God. There's a lady called Lydia as well in the New Testament who was a businesswoman and a church leader. Again, not explicitly named as single, but it's assumed because the scripture says that she focuses on her independent, faithful leadership and hospitality. And there were many others who were single in one way or another, who were part of God's mission in the New Testament. So we see this amazing shift and change that single people in the Old Testament were kind of seen as lesser, but Jesus changes all of that and actually includes them to be a part of his story. We don't know for sure, but we assume that many of the disciples, certainly when they were following Jesus, were single as well. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, got that one, yeah. So I say to those who aren't married and to the widows, it's better to stay unmarried just as I am. And then in verse 32 it says, I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. An unmarried man can spend his time doing the Lord's work and thinking how to please him. So Paul is suggesting that being single has meant that he has the freedom and the focus to be able to concentrate on serving God's mission and following him. He's not saying if you're married, break up your marriage right now and become single. That is not what he's saying. He's just explaining that his story and his experience means that if God says go, he can go. If God says do this, he can do it. And because his life is 100% devoted to God. And that's not saying that those in relationships or marriages can't be used by God either, but there is a freedom that comes with singleness, that if you accept it, it opens you up for God to use you in different ways. And that's certainly been the case in my story. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me. So as I said, I'm Anna, I'm single, and that's very much how I used to kind of feel. It used to very much define who I was. And for most of my mid to late 20s and 30s, I saw singleness as a negative thing, a burden. It was something that I was that I didn't want to be, something that I let define who I was. And I think part of that was because I grew up in an era in the church where waiting for the one was commonly taught to young people in regards to relationships. And there was also a movement called the Purity Ring, which was amazing. And it encouraged young people to stay celibate until marriage. And there was this ring that you could get and wear on your ring finger as kind of a sign that you were waiting and you were devoted to God. But I think, and I'm 100% behind that, please don't mishear me. I myself am waiting for marriage. But I think those things put so much pressure on marriage that it has kind of created this kind of cycle that we are in now. And I think this issue with both of those things is that you end up putting marriage on a pedestal as the ultimate life goal. And if I'm honest, when I look back now, that was the message that was given to me by the church, or certainly that was the message that I received by the church. Never do I ever remember anybody talking about singleness in church or at a Christian event. The only thing that I picked up from somewhere was that you were maybe called to singleness. So if you grew up as you got older and you hadn't found somebody, then God must be calling you to be single, right? And that was kind of the idea that I grew up with. So when I had my first relationship in my mid-20s and it ended, I was heartbroken and confused because I thought he was the one, because that's what I'd been taught all of my life, right? And that was really, really hard because clearly he wasn't, because it ended. So I picked myself up And I tried to be okay with being single again. And for many years, I went through this roller coaster of, I'm single, it's great, I can do things for God, it's amazing, I'm fine as I am, I don't need a guy, I trust God, to real lows of, what is going on, God? What is wrong with me? Why hasn't this happened for me yet? And to quote a current popular song in the charts at the minute by the singer Ray, where is my husband and what is taking him so long to find me? And I cycled around these feelings for many years. All of my friends and even young people from when I was a youth worker were getting married and invited me to their weddings, which was amazing, but I was still on my own. And whilst I was happy for them, it didn't take away the ache in my heart. Because I truly believe, as we read in Genesis, that we were made for relationship with one another. And I longed for that with all of my heart. And the issue was that the message that I had received from the church was that singleness meant lesser. It meant second class. I also had no one to really talk to about how I was feeling. As great as my married friends were, that they tried to understand, they couldn't. How could they? Being single in your 20s is very different to being single in your mid-30s and into your 40s. And in the past few years, I've met a number of single people who are older than me, so they're further on the journey. And as I began to talk to them, I realised that some of them were single, but also still held on to the hope that one day that would change for them. And that was a really new thing for me, because I felt I either had to be one or the other. I didn't feel like I could be in this, I'm single, but I don't want to be. I felt like I had to be single and I had to be okay with that. And that was just my story and I just had to accept it. So talking to people that were like, no, it's okay to be 40, 50, 60 and be single, but still would rather not be single. That's okay. So that was life-changing for me. And I feel like the last few years there has been a growing movement of single people within the church beginning to talk more openly about the ups and downs of being single and dating in a marriage-focused church culture. And I don't think the church has explicitly done anything wrong. I think it's just something that has been created. And it's important that those of us that are single just highlight it and go, hey, this is how we feel. It's tough. Like, it's really tough. And we need you to help us. So back in 2023, something massively changed for me. So I went to an amazing festival called Wildfires that I've been to every year since. And I went just open. Their strapline is contending for the next Great Awakening. It's an amazing festival. And I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't really go with any expectations. That was my point. I just wanted to go and just be like, God, what do you want to do? What do you want to say? But I certainly wasn't prepared for what he did and what he said. So on one of the evenings, there was an amazing talk by a lady called Rachel Hughes from Gas Street Church in Birmingham. And she talked about this idea of unfulfilled longing, the things that we long for and we hope for that one day would happen, and they just haven't happened. And how we deal with that and how we cope with that. And she kind of named a few things, maybe not being able to have children, or people in your family not coming to know Jesus. And then she just, it was almost like a throwaway, she just said relationships, and my stomach like went, ugh! You know, when you're just like, something hits you. And I was like, what was that? And then as the talk went on, I was just like getting so overwhelmed. I knew God was speaking to me. And I went forward for prayer, and they did a time of response, and I just sobbed, and I sobbed, and I sobbed, and I sobbed. And I think in that moment, I can't really quite remember what happened or what was said, but I just remember it was just like this letting go, letting go of all the pain of the relationships. I'd only had a couple really, but the relationships I'd had that hadn't worked out, letting go of all the pain that I was carrying and this kind of burden of being single and not wanting to be. And I was pretty much the last person in the tent that night. But something shifted in that moment. Something changed, and I surrendered everything that I was carrying about my singleness. And since that day, I've been most at peace with my singleness than I've been in years, than I think I can ever remember. And it's been like this long-lasting, where I had the ups and downs before in my 20s and 30s. It's been kind of more of a long-lasting, steady thing that it's okay, it's all right. And I finally realised that it's just my relationship status. Doesn't define who I am as a person. Being single has also been a blessing. I've done so many amazing things for God. I have moved up and down the country, because when I was 14, I knelt and said, "Here I am, send me," which is a crazy, dangerous prayer, because he did. And I've lived in Essex and Hull and Bridlington and Manchester and done amazing things for God that actually now I think, do you know what? If I had a family, would I have been able to do those things? Would I have been able to just drop everything and move to the other end of the country? Probably not. And shortly after the encounter that I had at Wildfires, I ended up on the core leadership team at TCC, and I really don't think that that's a coincidence. I feel like God has shown me that in the letting go of that thing that really had become a bit of an idol for me, that by letting go of that, he was like, right now you can step into the plan I've got for you. Being in leadership, which was certainly not on my to-do list, I must say. Leadership for me was young people, and that was where it stopped at. Being in like big church leadership was definitely not my plan, but apparently it was God's. And also, I think I've realised the utter privilege that I have of being a single woman in leadership, and how rare that is, and the position that God has put me in. And because of that, that's why I want to talk about it more. And I'm actually in a place, if you'd have asked me a couple of years, 4 years ago, to speak about this, it wouldn't have even been on my radar. But because of that encounter and that shift that's happened, is something that I'm really passionate about. So do I still want to be married? Yes. Do I still have times where it's hard being single, and I wish that I wasn't? Yes. Do I still hope and pray that things might be different one day? Absolutely. But it doesn't define who I am the way that it used to. I am enough as I am. I don't need a guy to complete or validate me. Jesus says that I'm enough, and that's what matters. And I've also realised that passage in Genesis about us not being alone isn't just about marriage. It's about community and friendships. And I read this amazing piece in a book a while ago that talks about what we're looking for in our relationships. We can often find those values and things in our friendships around us, so we don't necessarily need that in a partner. The people we surround ourselves with give us the things that we need as people to function, I guess. So we need to focus on rather than focus on what's missing, surround yourselves with those people and invest in your friendships. One of the amazing people that I've come across that speaks really openly about singleness is Lauren Windle. She has an amazing book called Notes on Love, Being Single and Dating in a Marriage-Obsessed Church. And she says this: there's no guarantee that you'll find that person. What's important is staying close to God and keeping Jesus central in your life. You will never look back and regret that decision. And that's what I've kind of putting all my energy into chasing after him, following him, going to the mountaintop places with him. All I want is him. And if the other thing comes, amazing, brilliant. But actually, all I want is Jesus. And John 15 verse 5 says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. And we just need him, don't we? Whatever our stage of life is, we need God to be a part of it, because what's the point if he isn't? What is the point? Our focus, I remember when I was growing up, the 24/7 prayer movement was becoming a thing, and there was this amazing poem that appeared on the wall in their prayer room. It kind of has transpired years later that Pete Gregg kind of wrote it when he was in there one night, and there's this phrase that I just keep coming back to that says, obsessively, undeniably, Jesus. And that's what we want. We need to be obsessed with him, and he needs to be our absolute everything. So, to finish with, just some tips then. How, as the church, can we support single people or become more single friendly? So make a conscious effort to greet those who arrive on their own. Obviously, don't assume that they are single. I have had a kind of an experience once. I was at a church with a friend, and the pastor's wife came over and was talking to him because she knew him, and he introduced her to me. And I, at the time, was wearing a ring on my finger because I was wearing a purity ring. And she went, oh, when's your fiance joining you in Hull? And he isn't. I'm single, actually. This is a purity ring. Really awkward moment. So please don't assume anything about anybody's relationship status, single or otherwise. But let's make people feel welcome, especially when they arrive on their own. I know you guys are great at welcome anyway. When I first came here years ago, that was one of the things that stuck out to me. I remember Mum and I came back the week after, and Julie had remembered our names, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. So keep that up. But yeah, particularly make sure single people aren't sat on their own. Introduce them to people that they can sit with. Think about your social circles at church. Do you have single friends as well, or do you just focus on couples? Sometimes we don't get invited to stuff because we'd be an odd number. Or sometimes they'll invite you and another person just so there's like a couple, and it's like, actually, I'm all right coming on my own. Now, everybody's singleness story is different. I'm obviously only giving my version of stuff here today. So I don't mind going to stuff on my own. I'm an extrovert person. I can kind of deal with that. I would rather be invited than not. Make sure your invitations of hospitality include single people as well as couples. And be mindful when discussing dating with single people. That example I gave earlier, it can be really awkward. Or when people say, oh, you married yet? Have you found anybody yet? What's wrong with you? I've had that one. Nothing actually. Well, I hope not. Let's just be mindful about how we're speaking, and let's not kind of put this pressure on people either. And please be careful with the cliches. I've heard them all. I could write a book on them. Plenty more fish in the sea. It'll be in God's timing. And I'm not saying that those things are wrong, but you just kind of get a bit sick of hearing them. When in social settings or small groups with a mix of single and married people, be aware of when the conversation focuses too heavily on family talk. I was at a conference recently, and the speakers were amazing, and I understand it's their life experience. Both of them were married, and all of the examples they gave were about married and family life. And I just sit there going, I can't really relate. I get what you're saying, but I can't really relate to that. And most of the people, I'm not sure about the worship team, but most of the people that were leading the conference were definitely married. So there was a massive, singleness wasn't really represented on that stage. And one of my friends that was with me, who's married, she actually checked in and was like, are you okay? Because I've noticed that. And that's because of the conversations we've been having in our leadership team. Let's just be kind of mindful that I understand that is your life experience and you have to speak from that point of view, but let's just be careful that we're not talking or focusing too much on marriage and family, either in church or in social settings. Show up to celebrate them. We often celebrate marriages or when people get engaged in church, which again is amazing. We've had a bit of a flurry at TCC at the minute, which is fantastic. But let's celebrate the ordinary, everyday things as well. Birthdays, job promotions, graduations, new homes. They're all important moments in people's lives, whether they're single or whatever their relationship status is. But particularly for single people, obviously those things are a big deal and really important. Practically help with DIY projects. When you don't have a partner, you have to do them on your own. And there's certain things that I will do and certain things I will not touch. And I do not have the expertise for. So moving house, practical tasks that can feel really, really daunting. Or for me, like going and shopping for a car, like it's a big decision, and Mum helps me best as she can, but she hasn't got, a huge motor knowledge. But I know that there is somebody within my church now who I could invite along with me to come and look at a car, because I don't have my dad either. So it's all of those things are kind of really important. And I think the other thing to say is when obviously some single people don't have their family nearby either. So when I've lived in the places that I've mentioned, my family were back here. And so I was kind of up there without my family to support me in those things. But God was amazing. When I was in Hull, my vicar and his wife kind of took me under their wing. And every Wednesday I would go around their house. They called it Anna's Day. And I would go round for tea. And the first time I went, I just thought they were inviting me for tea because I was new. And I was like moving the plates and stuff onto the side. And then I get handed a tea towel and told where things get put away in the cupboard. And I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't just me being a visitor. This is me being invited into your family. This is me being a part of you. So I actually had a pair of slippers that I used to leave at their house. And I was invited into their family, which was huge and so important for me. When things were really tough, I could go to them and they would support me. And we're still in touch and still catch up now and consider them my whole parents, really. Be there to help talk through and process life decisions, big or small. That's so important, just having people to talk to. Again, especially if you don't have family and stuff, it's huge. Just invite people in, invite them in to your home. Lauren Windle, who I quoted earlier, I know that she has a lockbox on her wall that her friends have the code to, so they can just get the key and just let themselves in and help themselves to anything in the fridge and sit on the sofa. And wouldn't it be amazing for us to have, that hospitality? I think there's a difference between hospitality and entertaining. Entertaining, we feel, we have to make everything prim and proper. We have to clean everything within an inch of its life and make it look like we're all together. Hospitality just means you're welcoming someone into your home, warts and all. I don't care what your house looked like. I just want to spend time with you. And just you giving me your time and your attention is amazing. So just some tips for you there. And just a few things. I've mentioned Lauren's book, Notes on Love. She's just an amazing author. She's written loads of other things as well on feminism and stuff. But this one particularly was really transformative for me. I think it was the first book I've ever read on singleness. There's plenty on dating, but there's not many on singleness. And then the Single Friendly Church Network. So they are an organisation that try and help churches become more single friendly. So they have an audit that you can go through, so you can there's different areas of church life that you go through and how are we with this? So we're doing this well. And it's not always to point out everything that's wrong. It's to go, actually, we're doing all right. We're doing okay. And you can register to become a part of their network. So they'll put you on their map. And they'll advertise this church is single friendly. And it's just so single people know they'll be looked after when they go to that place. But again, they just put out loads of amazing resources, especially in the seasonal celebrations that we have, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas. They put out loads of really helpful stuff of how you can help and support people, single people during those times. That's me. Thanks very much.